Hello and welcome to the Biohack Her podcast. I'm Azra Alagic, your host and founder of Biohack Her. I'm a health and wellness journalist, writer, corporate consultant, a biohacking advocate and practitioner, and I'm studying to be a health coach with the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. Biohack Her is a space where we can explore ways to optimize our health to live well longer. Whether it's through nutrition, exercise, cryotherapy, supplementation, technology, and more, I'll be bringing you information and interviews on understanding how biohacks can help you prevent disease, slow down, or even reverse the aging process by taking control of your unique bio-individuality. Want to know more? Let's start turning back the clock. Hello and welcome to another Biohack Her podcast, where I discuss all things health and wellness with leading experts and everyday people, paying a particular focus on helping you live well longer. Today, Rhea Fawole joins us to share her very personal journey about living with an autoimmune condition. Rhea is the CEO and founder of SOLVi Migration, specialising in immigration law, headquartered on the Gold Coast, Australia. Her passion to create SOLVi Migration came from 12 years of working in senior roles at the Australian Immigration Department and seeing the challenges people faced migrating to Australia. Something little known to most is that Rhea was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2010. When she was first diagnosed at the age of 32, she felt grief for the life she thought was over, as she learned to navigate changes in her body, mind, and spirit. But like the phoenix that she is, she has risen to self-educate, embrace, and thrive living with this condition. Autoimmune diseases affect over 1 million Australians and in the Western world are a leading cause of death in women under the age of 65. In America, 25 million Americans have one or more autoimmune diagnoses, and this continues to grow every year, while those being diagnosed continue to get younger. Examples of autoimmune diseases are type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, colitis, Crohn's, Hashimoto's, and Graves'. In conventional medicine, the official line is that it's not known what causes an autoimmune condition, though genes and family history are thought to be contributing factors. From a functional medicine perspective, many practitioners believe the root causes of autoimmune conditions to be toxins, allergens, diet, in particular an inflammatory diet, and stress. Today, Rhea walks us through what her initial symptoms were, how she was diagnosed, how it impacted her life, how those closest to her struggled to understand her condition and provide her the support she needed, what treatment she received, how she fought back from the initial impacts of the condition, how food as medicine became a lifeline to improved health and living well, and her top tips for how to live with an autoimmune condition like MS. Let's dive in. Hi, Rhea. Welcome to the Biohack Her podcast. Really excited to have you join us today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Look, I've been wanting to, you're a dear friend of mine, so I'll just put that out there. But you're also a very, very smart chick who is a lawyer but is somebody who suffers from MS. And I've been wanting to chat to you about that for a little while because I think, as good friends who work out regularly together, I have watched you be an absolute powerhouse and superwoman despite, your autoimmune issues. And you've so impressed me. And I just think, you're an inspiration to other people suffering with this condition and thought it would be worthwhile having a chat about where you've come from and how you've managed your condition as well. So you've got MS, and what were the signs leading up to you getting MS and what symptoms, did you have? When did you first know that you had it?
So I was diagnosed, I don't mind disclosing, I'm 45 years of age now. I was 32 when I was diagnosed. The things that led up to this, I was working in travel industry. I'd left working in the public sector temporarily because I felt I was getting too fatigued and drained. It was high pressure. So I thought I needed a sea change. This was probably early indications that I didn't understand were happening in my body. So I then worked as a travel agent only for a few months and then there was a lot of pressure in the sales aspects. And then I started to notice that I was getting really strong neck pains. Initially, I had thought, some kind of repetitive strain because you're sitting on a computer for hours. And at the time, I didn't recall, but I had a few weeks before those pains had these pins and needles running up and down my right arm. It would sort of come and go. And then I remember looking at my arm one time and showing a friend because it actually had goosebumps. And then a few minutes later, it was sweating. So it did some bizarre things. And then I kind of dismissed them and got on with my busy work until one day I woke up and went to pick up a cotton tip in getting ready in the morning, and I couldn't feel it. I went to, grab things as you do with my right hand, and the sensation wasn't there. And I thought, this is really, really strange. I've had all of this pain and these weird sensations. So off I went, first of all, to a chiropractor because I thought maybe I've got a pinched nerve. A very good chiropractor who fortunately had some experience working in hospitals as well. And he very quickly said, look, this is unusual. You would need to have 5 different areas in your body impacted for this to be a nerve issue only. So I'm going to refer you on for some more tests. So then started down the path of getting x-rays and then CT scans. There weren't results there. So I was sent off for a cervical spine MRI, referred to a sports doctor. All of this process took a couple of months. And then when I got to the sports doctor, they reviewed the cervical spine MRI and saw that there were lesions. So immediately I was referred to a neurologist, and the neurologist ordered more MRIs, both for the brain and more contrasting ones for the cervical spine. And by this stage, that numbness had started to result, because it took a few months to get to this process. The muscle started to atrophy in my right hand. So I wasn't able to grip a pen properly. I couldn't do any fine motor skills. The neurologist then confirmed that, in fact, I had multiple scleroids, which is, the scars that were appearing on the brain, and that I also had some lesions on the cervical spine. And then they saw also in that the imaging, they can see that there was a bit of demyelination, which is what MS does, is it sort of attacks the myelin sheath. So that's how that all came about.
What does that mean now? Demyelination, what does that mean? I don't know.
So everyone has around the cervical spine, it's covered in this lovely coating, which is your myelin, and that protects all of the messages that need to travel up and down the central nervous system to do things like control how your body reacts and responds to things. So for people with MS, where the disease has, somewhat eroded, so the demyelination, some of the myelin is damaged in certain areas, that results in disabilities appearing. And that can be permanent, depending on how progressive the form of MS is that you have. I have what is called the most common kind of multiple sclerosis, which is relapsing remitting. So around 70 to 80% of people who are diagnosed with multiple sclerosis will be diagnosed with the type that's called relapsing remitting. And there's other kinds that are sort of more progressive. So some people with relapsing remitting, if you don't take care of your health during that stage, as you get older, it can progress into a primary progressive, which is sort of a more aggressive form where the disabilities increase, and the secondary progressive, a lot of those people. So I have had a friend who I grew up with who had that, and that meant that she then was unable to care for herself, and she was bedridden, so unable to feed herself, toilet herself, or anything like that. So that's the far more rare but aggressive forms.
Yeah. How did you feel when you were diagnosed? What was your reaction?
At the time, I was devastated. I thought, this is the end of my life. I think because unless you have family or friends that you know and spend a lot of time with, there's not a lot that's known about it other than it's bad and it's scary. So the only experience that I had, I grew up and was a ballerina as a child. And one of the ballet school teachers, it was a husband and wife team, and the wife had multiple sclerosis. I now know that what she had was secondary progressive. So she went from being a ballerina to being in a wheelchair and unable to mobilize in the course of a few months. So that was the only exposure that I had to MS. It kind of felt like I went through a huge grief because I thought this is where I'm headed to. I thought I'm heading to a wheelchair and my life is now over. So it was extremely confronting.
Yeah, well, it would be, right, because that is so confronting to think that, it could take that sort of a drastic turn. Do we know what causes MS?
So they still don't actually have they haven't sort of identified medically what the cause is. There's sort of theories, but nothing has been able to be proven. There are theories that there are genetic influences, but there's no one in my family on the maternal or paternal side or has had multiple sclerosis that we're aware of. There's other factors that they say exposure to certain viruses or bacteria, things such as the Epstein-Barr virus, which is actually what causes glandular fever if you've had exposure at an early age. And then there's other factors like the climate that you grow up in. So they tend to say people who are growing up in temperate climates, that means colder climates in their formative years. So when you're sort of a child growing up to the age of teenage years, if you're in colder climates and you've had exposure to certain viruses, there is a school of thought that says that makes you more susceptible to develop it. And then there's other things that will come into play, like psychological factors, which I personally feel has a lot more relevance in my circumstance, where you have exposure to certain traumas in your life and you're unable to manage your overall health. This will that's when I see it exacerbate, is when I'm sort of under extensive high stress and don't have appropriate outlets in place.
So am I hearing correctly? Do you think that past trauma in your life is what led to you getting MS, or do you think there were other contributing factors?
It's hard to say. I'm not obviously medically qualified, but there were a lot of circumstances in my childhood and then others who I've met in MS communities and so on. There's certainly factors that have each of us seem to have experienced that would kind of support that psychological impacts really can impact autoimmune conditions for people, or I guess exacerbate possibility that they will come about and play a part in someone's health.
Mm. Can you flesh that out a bit more for us in terms of your personal experience around the psychological factors? What was it that happened in your past that you feel contributed to this?
So there'd be quite a number of factors in my circumstance, and I think it's different for every person. For me, I was someone who grew up with a single parent, but I was a young Black woman in a very white country. So I was exposed to a lot of racism growing up and a lot of discrimination. And because I was raised by my mother alone, who was white, I didn't sort of have the protective factors of other family who I looked like or felt like or who could relate to me and support me. So that was quite a big struggle. Interestingly, I've only found out last year, added to how I was perceiving things growing up. I've since been diagnosed also with ADHD, so attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And a lot of people who have ADHD will experience forms of depression and the condition that is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which means it is actually more life appears to be more traumatic because of your the way you process things cognitively. So that probably also played a part in how I process the traumas and experience. There were other things that came about, sort of domestic violences in early adulthood, in relationships. Yeah, probably the lack of self-esteem that I had that led to me choosing those kind of poor relationships, but that all sort of compounds the impact on a person and how they experience life.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because stress is known to be such a contributing factor to chronic disease. And I think that a lot of people underestimate, the impact of stress and trauma indeed from, their past and how that contributes to their health in later life. In terms of your cultural background, Rhea, for those that don't know you, what is your cultural background?
So on one side, on the maternal side, Caucasian Australian, so sort of migrant background from Ireland and Scotland after a few generations. And then on my father's side, it's Nigerian. In terms of when they look at genetics and so on for multiple sclerosis, the African side is far less commonly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. But I do also look at the fact that the countries where they're saying there are lower rates of people being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, they would also have less capacity to diagnose those kinds of conditions. MRIs are not readily available in a lot of those countries, and also the education of neurologists is quite different.
Yeah, I just wanted to give people some context when you're talking about, your past experience of being ostracized because of your skin color. I think that provide people a little bit of context. What's it been like to live with MS since you've been diagnosed?
It was a bit of a roller coaster, honestly. I would now say that I don't call myself a survivor. I think I thrive in life, but I had to do a lot of work on myself and really, in the beginning, like I said, there was that grief. There was a huge grief. It was like a death of part of me, not knowing what was ahead. And most people who are diagnosed with MS, it happens in Australia. The average age is 30. I was 32. But for most people, it's anywhere from about 20 to 50 years of age is the norm. And for most people, that's when, you're having careers, families, and other things. So to think that it's all just going to stop at a point in life when you feel like you're getting going, that's a huge grief and loss. Then there was sort of the impact on my capacity that I found very hard. I said in the beginning, I had actually my muscle in my right arm atrophied. So I lost around, I think it was all up about 5 or 6 centimeters around my right arm. And I am right-handed, not being able to hold a pen and this was back when, you still signed for credit cards. So I was unable to make payments for things properly. I couldn't do up clips. I couldn't do my hair. It was very overwhelming. I was unable to work for a period of months, lots and lots of medical appointments, then trying to navigate while you're feeling, I guess, quite vulnerable, this transition. Supports are important. And unfortunately, I didn't receive really helpful supports. I think that it was not properly understood by family or the friends that I had at that time. And so I was often sort of left to my own devices. I think also being a woman who's a quite strong woman who finds her way through, people just kind of go, she'll figure it out and she can cope. So that made it all the harder because you're mentally not there to actually make the same kind of reasoned decisions when you're feeling all of this pressure and you're feeling changes in your body. The same year that I was diagnosed, I actually had the second relapse. So as my arms started to recover, I still don't have proper sensation in my right hand and it is weaker than it used to be, but I've worked hard to regain as much as possible. But the next relapse happened later that same year and that affected my right leg. So where the lesions sit will also affect how disability sort of presents. So when it affected my right leg, for a couple of months, my right foot couldn't dorsiflect at all. So the movement of the foot couldn't go up, which meant that I had what's commonly called foot drag for MS. You sort of have to drag your leg along because the messages where the damage was from the demyelination, it meant that those messages were not getting through properly for the foot to lift so that you can walk properly. And it also affected the top of the right thigh. So I was having all of these changes and feeling quite overwhelmed and alone. So that it really does, it takes a lot out of your mental health. And then obviously if your mental health is not great, that then, affects the physical health. So things were sort of compounding there for a while. And I had to dig really deep to sort of find the resilience to say, right, well, this is not the way that I want to spend the rest of my life. And, it's taken me a number of years. I would probably only say in the past 3 years or so that I've really taken control of my life and my health to the fullest extent that I have now, that I can and that I enjoy.
Well, it's an absolute credit to you because, you are, I've been witness to it, what a strong woman you are, and you have a strong presence, and you're a highly intelligent woman. And, it's disappointing to hear that you didn't have that support network around you. And I think sometimes as strong women, like you said, people think, oh, she'll be right, but just because you present as a strong woman doesn't mean that you don't need support every now and then. We're all human, right? And we all deserve to have that support. It's interesting because I think, you were mentioning about the psychological factors of grieving, and certainly that's such a huge impact, and yet it's almost, it has a negative impact on the MS as well, from what you were telling me, in terms of, you're stressing, about being diagnosed with MS, but stress is a contributing factor, and you've got to try and find ways to not stress about it. How did you go with coping with that? What I suppose methods did you implement in your life to try to help, reduce the symptoms and stop stress and other things like trauma and that impacting the disease?
So I guess when I see the different steps and stages of recovery that I had, finding a good psychologist, someone professional to talk to and to come up with strategies for, I guess, managing your own emotions. And that was one part that helped. Mindfulness, so meditating and accepting that sometimes it's not a good meditation, but it's a meditation. It's okay to have an unsuccessful one just to keep the practice. Having that time for myself to be grounded. In more recent years, I make sure every single day I must go outside, rain, hail, or shine. I have a dog, which I think she's been wonderful because she has to be walked every day. But even if it is raining, I pop on the rain jacket and I go outside. I find that just being outside of the house, feeling nature, no matter what you're feeling on any given day, really helps. And where I was at the time was, there's lots of bushland around, and now I've moved. I was in Canberra at the time, and now I live at the Gold Coast in another beautiful area that's surrounded by bush, and I'm near a river. And I find that connection with nature is really, really important. Navigating diet was another one. I hadn't realised how much it was impacting. I think other people can probably relate to this, but often to comfort myself, you turn to foods and they're not the right foods. But the flow-on impact of that on things like my fatigue levels, my mental health, it just wasn't good. So learning more about that and moving away from sort of fads, because then it became this sort of, oh my gosh, I've eaten these bad things and now I'm putting on weight and not feeling good, not functioning well. So then swinging to some other fad, which also would continue to make you feel not so great and not really help improve the symptoms. And so you'd end up in this yo-yo situation. It's been a lot to navigate, but I feel more in balance now. And that's, you sort of have to look at things holistically and also accept that it may be messy for a while. You may not get it right straight away, but to just keep trying until you find what really works for you. And also not listening to what, you may have people who love and care for you, but don't really understand and have the best of intentions, but you don't need to please them. You need to look after yourself, and the right people will be more than happy for you to do that.
Wise advice. So you mentioned diet, and I really want to do a bit of a deep dive into that because I think that's an important factor when it comes to any autoimmune issues. But, we know that around 46% of people living with MS are older than 55. I'm curious, what changes have you experienced with your MS as you've got older, if any?
So where I would see the biggest changes for me have actually been probably the social ones. I've had to be so much more mindful of who I surround myself with because it was impacting me beyond the MS with my health. So the MS stressors that came about made my body less able to cope with other things. I found then that I had fibroids that developed. So then I was having gynecological issues with that. Then that progressed on to me finding out that I had a high-grade cervical precancer cells, needing to have a biopsy for that. And at the time, I was on immune medication to treat the MS, which means your body has less capacity to recover from that. So then I developed an infection in the uterus, and things just kept, compiling on top of that. Then they found out I had endometriosis. So things just kept, getting worse and worse. So I really had to clear away the emotional noise, but also really focus on, what can I do as a woman now of this age? How do I take best care of myself in order to be a better human on this earth? When you ask about the changes, I would say dietary, so that the gut has been a big one. As the MS has progressed, I have noticed more sensitivities to things. And if I don't take care of that aspect, I can react quite severely, and it affects both the mental and physical health and symptoms. The other things that why it's so important to, I guess, maintain all of the health, I started to see issues with continence, which is another one, that lovely one that people don't want to talk about. So there were many bits that were sort of happening. The leg issues, I was getting more affected by heat. So each time I would get slightly hot, someone with MS, a lot of us will have body temperature regulation issues. And so trying to exercise and then suddenly your leg stops working because the messages are not getting through because of the heat. So these sorts of things have progressed if I don't take care of my health. And it was escalating at a rate where, like I said, initially I had the atrophying of the arm, then I had atrophying of my right leg, and I was on and off crutches, month on, month off. And when you're on crutches a lot, that it impacts things like your burses. So really, there was lots of different things that was sort of impacting as it was progressing. But I guess the thing that I would want to bring home to others listening is that by taking care of my health, many of those things have now reversed and improved.
It's amazing how when you do start to focus on that beautiful, nourishing self-care, how you can turn things around. Hey, it's quite miraculous sometimes, particularly when you start to use food as medicine. As I said, we'll take a bit of a deep dive into that in a moment. But before we go down the path of how you've been able to use food as medicine, what treatments have you had for your MS, and what has worked and hasn't worked for you?
So the biggest trigger is always stress. If I am highly stressed and you have that kind of feeling of a lack of control, and you've been reaching for the poor foods and you're feeling so stressed and overwhelmed that you give away the exercise, you don't have time for the mindfulness, that's when my system sort of says enough, and that's when the relapses have happened. So I have had several relapses. All of them have affected the right side of the body. So there was the right arm, then I've had it affect the right leg. I still have numbness on my right rib cage at one point. It affected that part of my torso. And then I've had other little things that have sort of cropped up at periods of stress. So stress was always the biggest one, and feeling that lack of control of what's happening with your life that would bring about the relapses.
So did you have to take any medication, any supplements or anything like that? Do MS sufferers take any supplements or any other sort of medication?
So I have been through some medication. So most neurologists will actually recommend that once people are officially diagnosed with MS, that they should be on some kind of immune medication to control it. I resisted until I'd had, I think, my third relapse, and then I went on what was called an immunomodulator, and that's Copaxone. That was the most common one at the time. It was preferred because there's a lot of longitudinal studies around it. For someone who is a woman, if I'd chosen to have children, it won't impact. If you kept taking it during a pregnancy, you can still breastfeed with it. So for women, this is kind of what they went to. Also, because it's an immunomodulator, you don't become immunocompromised in the same way that the other medications work. The issue that I was finding with that is it was an injection. Initially, it was a daily injection, and the substance that's in it is an irritant. So I looked like a speedball a lot of the time with black and blue bruises, and I'd have to have ice packs after each injection, and you would continue to be tender and sore, and you'd have to rotate the sites, but there's only so many sites and so many places that you can rotate. They eventually then came up with another dosage after a few years where it was 3 times a week. It was obviously less painful because you had a bit more of a break, but still not ideal. And if you want to have a life where you can travel, that medication also needs to be refrigerated. So it can be quite restrictive. Then I made the decision to go on a tablet form, and that is an immunosuppressant. Then I was found to have high-grade cervical precancer cells. So then having biopsies and treatments to remove the cells and assess whether or not it had progressed into cancer, which fortunately it had not. But then HPV, which is the virus that causes those cells, your body then needs an immune to fight off. Usually that would be done within 18 months. 2.5 years later, I still hadn't managed to get rid of the virus. And I put it down to me being on an immunosuppressant. My body did not have the immune to fight off this virus. And that was concerning because obviously as long as you have that virus, you can continue to have the cancer cells being produced. So I went and consulted with a neurologist again. We looked at the scans because at least by this point, I'd really focused on my health, fitness, getting my weight in order, and my spiritual and mental health as well, and then made the decision that I would come off those medications. Within less than 6 months, the HPV had gone.
Amazing.
So that was amazing. But yeah, a lot of people, when they're first diagnosed, if there's massive inflammation in the brain, they will also be put on cortisone steroids, which have a whole lot of other side effects, but obviously the desired effect to reduce the inflammation on the brain and the disease activity. But it's a lot of pressure on the body to deal with all of these additional medications. I certainly wouldn't advocate either way. It's a personal decision. But if you are choosing not to be on medication, you need to make sure that you're really looking after all of the aspects that we talked around, the stresses, the diet, the exercise, good sleep hygiene, because otherwise you're putting yourself and the condition at risk.
Yeah, so many considerations there, isn't there? And as you said, it's very individual in terms of people's choices as to which path they take, whether to be medicated or whether to opt for a more natural management approach, I suppose. And to that point, you mentioned diet. We know that Dr. Terry Wall is quite well known internationally for her own story with MS and the changes that she made through her own health journey to identify how food can be medicine and help or even reverse MS symptoms. I mean, I remember watching her story, her TEDx talk the first time and just thinking, wow, that is miraculous, the change that she was able to, create as a result of, her exploration around how food impacts her autoimmune condition. I mean, her Wall's protocol is targeted not just at MS, but also treating other chronic autoimmune issues. And you had mentioned to me previously that you have been on that particular protocol. How's it helped you and changed your life?
So that I obviously wanted to dive in and look at all of the aspects, and it was the one that made sense to me the most. There are other ones that some people will talk to. Medically, there's no support for any specific diet when it comes to MS, but certainly consistently they're saying, lower fats, have your leafy greens and that kind of thing more generally. But where I focused on the Weil protocol, it was really looking at the things that were going to create the inflammation in your system and reducing those or removing them entirely. I did try removing them entirely for probably a good 6-month period, but I did find that was...
Sorry, let me just jump in there. What are you talking about that you removed?
So removing entirely dairy and removing sort of the other grains like wheat from my diet and oats. And where I found that difficult is, being the social animal that I am, I do like to have a nice cheese every now and then. That was probably one thing. And in summer, I like to have 1 or 2 gelatis. It's not that I need it all the time, but I found that was restrictive. Also, the reducing of sugar, I have drastically adopted a lot of the things that are there, but I wouldn't say that I 100% have adopted the protocol, but I've switched out a lot of things. So there's very little dairy in my diet. I don't have cheese all that often. It's sort of like a, once a fortnight or once a month pleasure to have a little bit. And the gelati, I managed to just have 2 this summer, so I did pretty well. But, switching out dairies. Also, I focus a lot more on having fish, so far less in the way of red meat. I don't have processed meat. Lots of leafy greens. Every meal that I have is a bit of a rainbow. Every breakfast has berries, and I feel better doing that. I've noticed the difference in myself. I've noticed the difference in my digestive system, my ability to sleep properly. And another thing that's common with MS and that I was having before is called brain fog. So you can have cognitive changes. I would be tripping over my words and forgetting what I was saying and just generally feeling lethargic when I was eating all of those other things. Now that they're almost entirely removed out of my diet, as someone who is a solicitor, who runs her own law firm, you need to be able to communicate effectively with the staff, with the teams, when you're providing legal advice for clients and communicating on your client's behalf. So it is really important. And prior to that, I was struggling to be able to be effective in my role without looking after those aspects of my diet and controlling what I was putting in my body more closely.
So essentially an anti-inflammatory diet. We know that, if you've ramped up your fish, you're high in omega-3s, so that really helps with cognition. Implementing berries, highly antioxidant, really helping to the immune system and so on. So that's obviously worked significantly for you in removing processed foods and any inflammatory foods. And we know that dairy and wheat also can contribute to inflammation as well. So what was your diet like before MS? I mean, I think you were saying earlier that you were in
the fatigue. There would be a bit of a tendency for Uber Eats, sometimes 7 days a week. So grabbing what I could on the go. So, yeah, a lot of quite processed things, whatever was what I thought was quick and easy to grab. And I think the more you educate yourself and make the transition, the easier it becomes. So now I have the things that are better for me that I can grab readily. And so it's quicker and easier. And I now know I don't have a taste for those things anymore. I won't eat fast food anymore because it makes me feel so unwell and I can't enjoy it. So I don't find it satisfying in the way that I used to in the past. So my taste buds have changed, but also my body and my mind's awareness of what I'm putting in and the response is very present, which means I can do it more mindfully. And now I enjoy eating a better diet. In the beginning, when I was sort of making those transitions, that drastic change of I'm going to do 100% this, that was very restrictive and overwhelming. But building on it and educating myself and adding things gradually allowed me to adopt it and make it, the new habit and the new way. And it doesn't feel like a chore. It just is the way that I eat now.
Well, it's much more sustainable in terms of taking that approach. We know from a behavioural change perspective that, if you've been eating a certain way, it's very hard to change that overnight. It's an unrealistic expectation to be able to change that overnight. So slowly crowding things out as you have and implementing incremental changes where you can start to adapt and get your body used to those changes, and then just adding something a little bit extra, the next week or the next month. And, that's a much more sustainable way to do it, I think. Do you find that there are any particular foods that impact your MS more than others? Like, what about alcohol? How does that impact you, or anything else?
I do. So I find that alcohol will impact my ability to sleep properly. And if you don't have good sleep hygiene, then I get fatigued. If I get fatigued, I get brain fog. Another part, if I get fatigued, then I'll start to notice I get my foot drag will come up again. So I need to keep a balance with that. So I will enjoy some wines with the girls, as you would know, Azra.
Yes,
But
I know.
I do focus on one thing that I've changed the quality of the wine. And if I do have a glass, I tend to look for the organic and vegan wines that have less of the additives and preservatives, and making sure that you've prepared and had lots of water before and have lots of water after. But also, you need to have plenty of nights where there isn't the alcohol. So, tonight Friday night, I've got my sparkling water. I have a soda stream, but I've always got my sparkling water. I'll have herbal teas, just making sure that you keep your system hydrated and replenished, because you're going to put more pressure on your system to be able to process things when it's dealing with something like that, because, alcohol is not something that your system is looking for sustenance from.
No, it certainly isn't. And the body really does have to suffer and focus on processing the alcohol a lot more when you are drinking, as opposed to, processing other things like good nutrients in your body. I'll have to introduce you to some really nice alcoholic-free wine that I've recently found, and I have been enjoying a glass of that every now and then. And at least it makes me feel like I'm not missing out on too much when I'm choosing not to drink alcohol. Still hopefully getting some benefits from the polyphenols in the wine, but not the negative benefits of the acetaldehyde in wine. Any other foods that impact you? Like if you were to eat dairy now, or what, is there anything that sort of eat and then that's sort of random and you've noticed that you've had a flare up or?
So I'll notice in my gut, I will have digestive issues if I've had a lot of dairy. So traveling last year, I went to New Zealand, and when you're traveling, it sometimes is harder to find things. I went on a cruise and then went around. So I was like, I'll just have a glass of this or that. And there was quite a bit of dairy. And I ended up needing to have afternoon naps, and my stomach was sort of twisting and turning in knots. And you just find digestively it's harder to process. And then again, the fatigue. And I start noticing, every sniffle and cough that's around, I'm starting to pick it up. So once I returned and got things back in order, then within a week, my health started to return again. So dairy and also processed foods, lots of additives and preservatives, they will set off things for me, and I'll start to see the symptoms come up again.
Yeah, okay. No more cheese for you. Next time I see you pick up a piece of cheese when we're out, we say, put that down. You mentioned earlier about how MS impacted your life when you were first diagnosed, and how you had to make changes with, in terms of people who are around you and so on. Overall, how's it impacted your life from socialising to career or even just being a woman with MS?
I think a lot of people with MS would have this same experience as me. It can be quite challenging when you have a condition that's invisible to others. So, if someone has a visible disability, people will kind of make adjustments accordingly. But when you have a condition that people can't see it, you can be treated a little bit as, in some circumstances, you're a bit of a problem, or you're putting it on, or you're a bit difficult, or something like that. So that was very hard to navigate. And that's where I would sort of say to people, really evaluating who you're spending your time with and how they're reacting. For many years, I've spent a lot of my time and effort. It was like trying to prove to people or convince people or influence people. And that could be people I was in relationships with. It could be family members and some of the friends that I had at that time. And that is exhausting. And if they're not in a situation where they're wanting to be educated and they don't have that same perception as you're creating a further stress for yourself. So when I realized that I didn't need to please other people. I just needed to look after myself and make sure that I surrounded myself with the people who understood, loved, supported, and appreciated me and saw how I would manage my needs. I was not sort of leaning on them for it. It got easier, but I did waste a lot of time and energy and cause more problems for myself, I guess, trying to justify myself to others.
I think it's an important point that you made about, your condition being invisible and people making assumptions around how you might be behaving, but not actually knowing the full story. And so, I've always liked to think that, if somebody's behaving in a certain way, you hope that they're always coming from, a place of love and best intentions, and that there's something bigger going on with their story than what people might first understand or see. So, yeah, a really important point that you shared there. Thank you for that. You and I work out together a bit, right? So,
we're strong
gym
women.
buddies. We are. How important has exercise been for you in managing your MS?
So important. I guess if there's other people who are listening who are thinking about starting making some changes and exercise, they probably see you and your divine body in absolute athleticism. And, I've become quite strong as well in recent years. It can seem a little bit overwhelming and intimidating, but it's been a process. It's not been something where I just suddenly started doing F45 for things. I actually started off with, I need to consistently walk. So getting a dog was part of that. And so each day, first of all, it was take the dog for a walk, get a 20, 30-minute walk. Then I started with a personal trainer, and initially it was just one day a week. And the only thing we did was some very light weights. And it was really to try and get my body and muscles moving again and building up some of the strength that I had lost with the atrophy in the arm and in the legs. And then from there, I went on to Pilates. And I found that was really good because it was sort of fine tuning all of the little muscle groups and the core stability. Then I started to feel that I was fitter, and then a friend had suggested F45, and I felt ready to try it at that point. And I love going to the classes now. I'm doing that each day. And I have a partner I live at the Gold Coast, and I have a partner in Brisbane. He does something similar to the F45 called Body Fit. So if I'm staying with him, we go to that class together, or if we're at the Gold Coast, we go to the F45 together. You get a mixture of the cardio and the weights. And I still do my Pilates twice a week, and I still walk the dog every day. Having that variety of movement for my body, it helps my head, it helps my mind, and I'm much stronger than I have been in many, many years.
Well, I can certainly attest to that from what I've seen. I mean, we met at gym. That was when we first met. And I saw your beautiful, big, lovely smile and when you first joined our gym. And I had no idea that you had MS. I mean, you work out just like the rest of us. And, it wasn't until months and months later that, I found out that you had MS. And, that's, a real credit to you and how wonderful you've looked after yourself. And, I think such an important point and a lesson for others who might be suffering from similar conditions. And that's a really great segue into what are your top tips for managing an autoimmune condition?
I would say number one actually starts with that self-love and that self-care. You need to look at that from the perspective of how do I best care for my body and my mind? And for me, I also found a spiritual side that I didn't realize I had before. And that self-care means, like I said, for me, don't find time and give time to trying to convince people what you need. Figure out what you need and then find people who align with that and surround yourself with those people. Your life will get better and easier when you do that. I'd say that has been the first turning point for me. And, find the best way to look after your health needs in terms of diet as well. So important. And start listening to your body. You will start to notice more. It's like, okay, well, I had this and this food. How is my stomach feeling now? How, was I a bit sad the next day, or did I feel uplifted the next day? You can start to figure out from looking at things like the WELL protocol and others, which aspects are working for you. Build it up as a bit of a stepping stone, and exercise. Do exercises that you enjoy. I love walking my dog because I like watching her, because she's a bit goofy, and it just brings a smile to my face watching her enjoy the world and nature. And it's kind of like a meditation in and of itself. And don't feel less than because you have a condition. Don't feel like you're less of a person. You are as big and bright and bubbly as you want to be and you feel inside, and allow yourself to live a life that fulfills you. Don't let anyone else tell you how big or bright you can be or what you can or can't do in your life.
Such beautiful tips, Rhea. I think that's just gorgeous. Before we start to wrap up, you've mentioned gut health a few times, and I'm pretty passionate about this topic. I mean, gut health just is such a huge contributing factor to so many diseases, let alone autoimmune issues, but so many other chronic diseases. And, we know that it's like the second brain, and so many chronic diseases start from poor gut health. Highlighted that it has been a contributing factor. And, in other ways, what the foods that you've been eating, how has that contributed to your MS?
So I would definitely say that it created, so really stress and depression are closely linked. So if I'm having I'm consuming things that are bad for my gut health, then the depression goes up, then you're stressed, and then that affects your body and the symptoms as well. So taking care of that, and even being more mindful with the amounts, because I know in those periods of franticness, I would find I was reaching for bad foods and also reaching for them in larger quantities. I don't know if I've shared with you, Azra, but I actually lost 17 kilograms. Yeah, I did that in about a 6-month period.
Wow.
Before I moved to the Gold Coast. And that was also because research has shown if you are overweight, the disease activity and the symptoms will be increased with a condition like multiple sclerosis. There's also indications for people who are very underweight that can have a similar impact. So maintaining a healthy BMI and doing it with really good foods is very important. Initially, I made the mistake, like I said, it was just focused on weight. I need to get to this weight. But if you don't do it with the healthy, nutritious foods that nourish your body and allow your gut to process properly, you're still going to find issues that keep coming up with your overall health and your body's ability to recover from things. Because, there's lots of things that will happen in this world. We're still coming on the other end of a pandemic right now. People's immune and ability to deal with things is vital. So you really want to make sure that you're building your body's own resilience and ability to do that. And that requires the right nutrients. And I know for myself, when I've had periods where I'd been on antibiotics and so on, it had completely stripped out the gut flora. And then I went and saw a naturopath, and they were the ones who helped me to rebuild the gut health. And that's when I started to understand, okay, what I thought was IBS symptoms was actually just the whole gut health was completely gone. And once we were able to I went through a period with an anti-candida diet, so without the sugars and so on, and having more leafy greens, suddenly I wasn't having any of those symptoms anymore. And I thought, this is a miracle. It's like, oh no, I've just taken care of my gut health.
Funny how it works, though, right? Now, you can't underestimate that gut-mind connection. It's so important, and there is so much research out there that proves how important it is for us to look after our gut health and eating the right things, and managing the good and the bad bacteria, and having all the good gut flora, and having a good probiotic, and eating fermented foods and so on. So it is so vital. I think sometimes we come to it a little bit later in life in terms of that aha moment, but as long as we get there eventually, then hopefully we can continue to stay on the right track.
Exactly. It's never too late.
No, absolutely. It's never too late, for sure. Before I let you go, I have one more question for you. And I ask this of all the guests on the podcast. What does it mean to you to live well longer?
To live to your fullest potential and feel great while you're doing it. So I love exercising. Before it used to seem like a chore. I love it. It gives me the adrenaline, the endorphins, and to be surrounded by amazing people who I connect with and that we have lots of things in common and feel and approach life in the same way, and to continue experiencing and learning. I now have more of a childlike curiosity than I had 10, 20 years ago. I'm learning every day and I really love and enjoy that. And I plan on continuing to do just that.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been an absolute delight to do a deep dive with you into all things MS. And I know that you sharing your story today and being so giving and open in terms of your own personal health journey will absolutely affect other people who will be listening to this. So thank you for being so generous by sharing your story today, Rhea.
Thank you so much, Azra. Look forward to seeing you back at the gym.
I'll see you there. Well, that's a wrap for today's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And if you'd like to learn more about biohacking, go ahead and sign up on my website at www.biohack-her.com to get a free copy of my 5 top biohacks to get you kick-started. While you're there, you can also check out my blog page for more tips on biohacking. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on Apple, Spotify, and Google Play. Let us know if there's anyone you'd like us to talk to in particular, and we'll endeavour to get them on the podcast. Until next time, remember to live well longer.